Happy March, everyone. We've made it through most of the winter, and I'm really thankful because Finish It February, even though it's a short month, was definitely starting to get to me by the end. But I feel like I made a lot of progress, and I was inspired to sit down and do a little roundup of some patterns which I've been looking at, which will be perfect for stash busting all of the oddments that you may have now acquired after finishing all of your projects in February, if you're anything like me. So I was doing what I do best, which is browsing Ravelry and hypothetically shopping for future projects, which I enjoy spending a lot of my time doing. And I've come up with 10 patterns, which are there's no rhyme or reason to any of them, apart from the fact that I just think they would make brilliant scrappy projects. Because not everybody wants to just knit a plain project in, those like scrappy stripes that lots of people do. And I own things like that and I love things like that. But I also feel like it's nice sometimes to have kind of more inventive scrappy projects which use everything in your stash in a way that's just a bit more creative, but still leaning into the kind of colorful, you know, the things we like about scrappy projects and patterns. So I've got 10 here. They are mainly garments because my school of thought is if you are going to be trying to bust your stash, you want to be making stuff which uses a lot of yarn in one go. And I understand sometimes you might only have odds and ends, which are perfect for accessories. But if you want to make a dent, I think garments is the way to go. And garment patterns which are stash friendly, that use multiple colors or are kind of designed to be used with scraps rather than whole skeins or balls. So you don't need to buy anything additional. So we've got 10 patterns on the list. We've got a mix of some kind of more wintry knits, jumpers, cardigans, that type of thing, some summery knits, tops and vests, and I've just snuck an accessory at the end, even though I said it's going to be garments, but this one is an exception because I just really love the pattern. I think it's really clever. Some of these patterns are mainly taken from my favorite designers because I do have a habit of just going back to the people that I know and love when I'm browsing. So a lot of them you'll find will be kind of there's a couple of patterns which are by the same designer on here. But then I do also find that there are some designers who just love to work with scrappy patterns. And hopefully, I mean, sure, you'll see later when I go through the list how it works out. But the first I'm going to start with is Rose Knitwear, who I love. And one of her patterns was actually the first proper project that I ever made following a pattern. So I think her patterns were the first that I ever really read and learnt to read knitting patterns through. And it was definitely the first project that I was properly proud of and still have in my wardrobe now, 5 years later, I think, was when I made it. So I just think she's so creative. I know she worked with a big pattern company. I can't quite remember which one it was, and I'm not going to say the name without knowing. When she started out before setting up her own brand. But I feel like she just has such a distinctive style and a real design vision, and her patterns just use color and actually more than anything, creative stitch patterns in a really, really interesting way. So that's what I love. And the first one I'm going to talk about is one that I am currently working on, which you'll probably know if you've seen my Finish It February video or maybe some of my other podcasts, which is the Kaleido cardigan pattern. And I'm not going to dwell on this because I think I talked about it in the last video about why I love it so much. And it's mainly because it is designed to be made with whatever you have left in your stash. So in the pattern, she has included really precise meterages for each of the stripes. So, and even when the stripes change width on the kind of bit of the body under the arms and then on the yoke and then on the sleeves. So there are precise meterages for every color A or color B, and for which section of the garment they're actually used on. And that way you can really plan your stash and hopefully get the most out of what you have, which I just think is brilliant. And I think some of the samples that she has made are using kind of oh god, maybe 8 or 9 or 10 colors, and there's kind of boundless opportunities, um, limitless opportunities for color combinations based on what you already own. And to be honest, I think I have seen some people who've done really nice kind of coordinated stripes. But then, like props to them if you've got the quantities, and if not, at least it's nice to know that you can make do with whatever you have, even if it's really, really small quantities. I think the smallest is kind of like you only need maybe 30 meters of something for the body, so it's really, really not very much. And it's a great way of using up just little oddments that are left over from other projects, I think. Now, the second pattern on the list is another rose knitwear pattern, which is the sole top. And I realized I forgot to say for the first pattern that it comes in 8 different sizes and uses Aran weight yarn. I'll add that on as an appendix. Now, the sole top, because they're both from the same designer, also comes in 8 sizes. But this uses a DK weight yarn or anything that can be held together to meet gauge. So I know in some of the samples, she has held together, either fingering or sport weight yarns to kind of meet the gauge for the stripy version of the sole top, which is the one that I really want to look at because I love a stripe as much as the next person. But I just think in this pattern, with the kind of bold straps that it has, it just works so well. And I always think it's lovely to see when a designer's done kind of like a monochrome or whatever the standard version of the pattern is, and then also showing you ways that you can kind of make it work for whatever purpose you need it for, if it's stash busting or whatever. And this is obviously a summer vest, so is best suited to kind of lighter yarns, cotton, linen, silk, whatever you've got really. Which is just a great way because I feel like everybody's go-to with stash busting is always kind of colorwork patterns that are usually jumpers and cardigans and often need wool or heavier materials. So it's nice to see that you can use up all your summer yarns as well, because if you make a lot of spring summer projects, then it's likely that a lot of your stash, will be in summer yarns. And I feel like this is just a great way to get those used up as an option. Now, the third pattern is actually the Spot Sweater by Anne Wenzel, which is a kind of Fair Isle pattern that I just love. But she also has released a colour edition, which it has attached to it a colour guide for using up leftover yarns to create a kind of gradient down the body of the sweater, which I think is so clever. And you can obviously the color edition is available to buy on Ravelry, but I do believe that if you already own this pattern, you can also get the color guide for free on her Instagram page. I might be able to find a link to it, but I'm not sure. I won't promise anything. But even if not, go wild. I think there's a lot of kind of scope to be really creative with the use of colors on these. I'm gonna put up a couple of photos from other people's projects, which I really love, who do this in a kind of stash busting way, which I think is just brilliant. And this pattern comes in 6 sizes and is designed to be knit with a fingering weight yarn and a mohair. So I think the best thing about this pattern for stash busting is that it's a really good opportunity to use up leftover mohairs, which you don't necessarily have a matching main yarn for, because if you often knit with mohair, you'll find that, you know, you're not going to have exact quantities left of each. And I feel like if you want to blend kind of different primary yarns and different mohairs, it actually just makes this pattern look even better, um, and makes the gradient really stand out when you're kind of, you know, combining different colors at different points. So yeah, I love that one. And I think I'm definitely going to make that maybe towards the end of this year in the winter, whenever I've got a lot more mohair left over. I think it'd be good to get a good chunk out of my stash gone, really. And in a similar vein, the fourth pattern here is the Callista sweater by Morka Knit. And this one comes in 7 sizes. Now, I think the recommended yarn is a little bit ambiguous because I know that it has quite high meterage for the weight, but I believe it's classed as a bulky yarn. Although I'm not sure I believe it because the actual sweater is knit on 4.5 and 5.5 millimeter needles, which would kind of make it more Aran. But then I've also never seen this yarn in person to know. So as far as I can guess, I think it would be best suited to kind of Aran slash bulky weight yarn, depending on what you're holding together. And this is just a gradient sweater pattern, but I think it would be so perfect to kind of combine more colours in the gradient than the 2 which have just been used in the sample. And I feel like there's a lot of potential for combining, you know, however many colours you're hoping to use up in a kind of gradient pattern all the way down the jumper, which I just feel like would be really effective and look great. And it's also nice if you're kind of trying to stay away from the whole stripes thing, because I know that as soon as you look up patterns that are good for stash busting, it's just immediately stripes everywhere. And like, I'm a stripe lover. I love a stripe. I have loads of striped garments, but there is such thing as too many. Or sometimes you just want a bit of a change. And then in cases like that, I just think this is perfect. Now, the 5th pattern, which I have on my list here, is kind of more of a family of patterns. And I'm going to include all 3 because they are variations on a theme, but I think they're all great individually, depending on personal preference. So these next 3 are from Spectacle Strick, and they are the Stripe Overload, Polo, Cardi, and Polo Tee, which come in 7 sizes. And I believe the polo jumper and the cardigan use Aran weight yarn. And then the t-shirt is a cotton DK. So depending on what you need it for, depending on what you have in your stash, there are some good options there. And I think each of these patterns is just fabulous. I'm sort of really hoping to make the polo shirt, the polo top rather, for summer this year, but I'm kind of a bit unsure about it at the minute. But I would love to own one. I might add it to my list. So although these 3 patterns are all worked in 2-color stripes, I think there is a brilliant opportunity for a bit of creativity here. I've definitely seen some inspiration photos on Pinterest which just use the kind of dual stripes in a really interesting way. If you like that look, I think they're a great source of inspiration and they'd translate really well to this pattern, I think. And so, as I was saying in the last one, you know, it may be the case that you own a lot of stripes. Maybe you feel like it's not something you need in your wardrobe at the moment. And I think this next option is brilliant for that. This is the Mitsoni sweater by Lindsay Deegan, which comes in 7 sizes and uses a kind of double knit-ish worsted weight yarn, as far as I can tell. I think this is another pattern which has been designed explicitly to help people use up their oddments and scraps. So the weight is a little bit ambiguous. I think it's more use what you like as long as you can get gauge, which is a great way to be. It's very helpful. And this comes in 7 sizes. And this was a pattern which had been hidden on Ravelry from me, apparently, even though this is a designer that I do love and I've knit projects from her before. So it was a really great option. But I just love the fact that it's kind of more of that retro zigzag stripe pattern, which is a little bit different to just kind of horizontal stripes that you see in a lot of, you know, similar patterns at the moment. And then there's also this kind of like vertical, almost lace eyelets running down it, which is really clever. But you've still got the ease of being able to work everything in whichever color you're using for the stripe at the time, and not having to faff around with intarsia or carrying floats for Fair Isle or whatever, um, which is nice, really, for a change sometimes. And I also think that this is just a really, really fun pattern, especially the color palette that she's used for the sample is fantastic. Um, and I think this might actually be another one that I use maybe to get rid of some of my more recently acquired oddments. So the seventh pattern on my list is actually from a designer that I think is so underrated, um, which is James N. Watts. And he actually has a YouTube channel, which is fantastic if you don't watch it already. It's more a very much long form kind of podcast vlog content. But this is the Beads of Joy t-shirt pattern, which comes in 5 sizes and uses a sport slash DK weight yarn. And so the samples here are actually knit up in Noro, which is just, I think, this pattern's really been designed to show off the beauty of Noro yarns. And I know he uses a lot of Noro in his other patterns as well. But this, I think, would work just as well with if you have gradients, if you have solids, if you have a combination of both. Especially if you have stuff that's kind of limited quantities, but is really, nice yarn that you want to show off. I think this is what this is perfect for. And there is actually a segment on the pattern page where he says, feel free to use only one colorway instead of two, or more than two if you want. You can use any yarn to get gauge in, including the many other offerings from Noro. Feel free to dip into your stash to use scraps, mini skeins, color changing yarns, or solids. There's a lot of room for personal creativity in this pattern. And I just love the fact that that's been accounted for. Because it really does make it easier when you're, trying to calculate what you can use out of your stash. But I think whatever you combine would just make a beautiful finished piece in this pattern too. And I also think it's the kind of pattern which you would use. Obviously, it's been designed for summer yarns, but I think if you were a fan of a short sleeve jumper, it would probably work really well in, wools or other winter yarn too. So just wanted to add that in as a note. So now my final two garment patterns are both from the same designer, which is Le Pool. And the first one is the Alarm sweater vest, which I know is not a new release. I think that was out a couple of summers ago. And I'm still devastated that I've never actually got around to making one, because it's one that's been on my list for such a long time, probably 2 years or something now. But I've kind of been waiting to have the right concoction of colors, I think, to make it really work, because, I don't want to just throw it together with anything, even if I don't love the color palette. So this is a brilliant side-to-side vest pattern that comes in 6 sizes. And again, it's one of those where the weight of the recommended yarn is kind of ambiguous because it is designed to be a scrappy project. So as far as I can tell, it's aiming for kind of worsted or Aran weight. But obviously, I mean, in the samples, Le Pool's used a lot of different weights kind of held together to get the right gauge. So I think there's probably a lot of flexibility on that front. I think, personally, I don't know if I'm a garter fan in the general way. I don't think I've ever really used it for more than anything, maybe. Sure, I must have used it. I actually don't think, I definitely haven't made any items of clothing in garter stitch, because I just think the texture is a little bit dishcloth, maybe. But the side to side garter, I think I can get behind, because when you work it in the vertical kind of rows, it gives this kind of rib effect almost because of the stretch that you get with garter stitch, which I think is really effective. And so I think actually it's a lot more flattering for clothing when it's being constructed from one shoulder to the other, instead of, top down or bottom up, whatever, in the usual way. But this is a brilliant pattern, and I know that it's designed for scraps, and you can basically modify it to suit your needs, so you can use up, even things that you only have tiny, tiny quantities of. I think will make it look all the better, really. And So the second to last pattern is also from the pool. And now I acknowledge that this is highly impractical for most people. I would love to own one. I don't know if I'd ever wear it. I just don't live in a really beachy country, and I feel like that's what this is designed for. But I'm sure maybe a lot of my viewers will live in warmer places where this would make a great beach cover up or just something for the pool for holidays. I think that's what I see this being. But then you could probably make it work, you know, with shorts or a different skirt underneath or whatever too. So this is the cloud skirt pattern, also by the pool. And this one comes in 8 sizes and uses, I think, a fingering weight yarn as the recommended. And it's in this kind of lace fillet stitch, which I think is such a clever construction. And I actually don't own the pattern, but I would be really interested to see how the color work is done in that stitch. But the sample looks fantastic, so I think it would definitely work in, whatever you might have in your stash. And I also think there's something about doing striped color work in a way that where the lace stitch is kind of translucent, makes it look really different, which I like a lot too. And yeah, I believe this doesn't need blocking either because it's lace. It's kind of designed to have the elasticity of the pre-blocked garment. So you could probably use stretchier wools, other yarns, or probably summer yarns as well, like cotton and linen or whatever that maybe has less stretch. I think they'd probably work equally well. Um, I believe both of these are. Oh, sorry. I believe the sample is mainly knit in cotton, but it is. I think a lot of the other projects, use some wool as well at the same time. Although, if it's for hot weather, don't know how practical that is, but oh well. Now, my final pattern is, in fact, an accessory, but I just think it's such a clever item that I wasn't going to miss it out. And that is the Loopy Studio scrunchie bag, which is obviously just one size because it's a bag, and I believe it's recommended to be knit in a double knit weight. But what's great about this pattern is that I know for the crocheters out there, she also has a version of this where you can buy the pattern for crochet for the same item. So you can work it in knit and crochet equally. Obviously, there are different finishes, but depending on personal preference. I just think it's brilliant. And I believe this was from a collab with Ching Fiber. But although this too is a kind of two-tone stripe pattern, I just think it would look so brilliant if it was done in scrappy stripes or multicolored stripes, you know. And I think it also doesn't use huge quantities, so even if you did want to stick to the 2 colors, it's probably a really great option for just using oddments that are left as well. I believe it is kind of knit in a tube, and then there's a drawstring which kind of runs through the strap, which allows it to be used as a shoulder bag or a crossbody, which is very fun. I've definitely seen a lot of people kind of on Instagram having a go at this, and it's really inspired me. I think this summer this might be one of my projects on my list. Uh, I just really want some fun colors. I think that would be the big thing. But yeah, if you're not big on knitting scrappy garments, then I think it's a really practical bag that would be a really fun project to make as well. So I know this has kind of been a real power through 10 of my current pattern faves, but there is a lot more out there. I get a lot of inspiration from Instagram, from Ravelry, Pinterest, and other places online. And I'd love to know if anyone has any suggestions of some of their favorite scrappy patterns. You can put them in the comments, and I'll definitely have a look because I always want more inspiration myself, and I think a few of these will definitely be going on the queue for later this year. I'm kind of already thinking about what I've got living in my stash basket that would be perfect for a lot of these patterns. So, yeah, hopefully next time I see you, I'm going to have a better podcast update. I think February was just such a busy month, such a short month. I kind of didn't get as much done as I was hoping to, but I still feel like I've accomplished a lot. I'm still, I'm still loving what I'm doing, and I've got a new cast on that's really exciting. So in the next couple of weeks, hopefully I'll be back to talk about that. And yeah, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Put any of your suggestions in the comments. I will love to read them. Have a lovely rest of your